My name is Margaret. I'm 81 years old now, and I've lived a long life, one full of sacrifices, quiet hopes, and endless love. But if you asked me what my greatest regret was, I wouldn't say the hard times, or the loneliness I sometimes felt as a single mother. No. I would tell you the truth. I gave my children everything I had, everything, and in return, they left me with nothing. I grew up in a humble home in Georgia, during a time when women were expected to keep quiet, work hard, and put everyone else first. And I did. I learned to cook by the age of 10. I took care of my younger siblings while my parents worked long hours. I married young, too young. Maybe Aunt had 3 beautiful children, David, Anna, and Matthew. When their father walked out on us, I was only 2. He left with nothing but a suitcase and a goodbye. No support, no calls, no help, so I became everything for my kids. I was their mother, their father, their provider, their protector. I worked as a housekeeper during the day and baked pies at night to sell in the neighborhood. Every cent went to them. I never bought myself new clothes. I ate what was left after they had eaten. I stitched their school uniforms by hand. I stayed up with them when they were sick, missed work when they had a recital, and celebrated even their smallest victories like they were Olympic gold medals. I thought love would be enough. I thought that if I gave them the best I could, they'd always remember. That when the time came, they would take care of me. That they would never let me fall. As I grew older, I began to slow down. My hands, once strong and fast from decades of work, began to tremble. I started forgetting things here and there. My legs didn't carry me as far. David said he could help manage my bills. He was good with finances. Anna suggested I sign the house over to them just in case something happened. Matthew said he'd take over my savings and help invest it so I wouldn't have to worry. I believed them. They were my children. I trusted them. I thought, this is what a mother does. She gives, she trusts, she believes. But what I didn't know then was that all the giving would one day be used to take everything away. I remember the day I came home from a doctor's appointment and saw a notice taped to my front door. It was a foreclosure warning. I thought it had to be a mistake. My name wasn't even listed. I called David, panicked, and he calmly told me, "Mom, we moved some things around for your own good. It's all under control." Except, nothing was under control. My bank account, once full of careful savings from a lifetime of sacrifice, was empty. The deed to my house, transferred. The power of attorney documents I had signed, thinking it was just for emergencies, had been used to erase me from my own life. My daughter Anna came by the next day with a forced smile and a box of my things. "Mom, it's better this way," she said. "You'll be more comfortable in a facility." A facility. I gave them decades of my life. I gave up my health, my dreams, even my identities so they could become something. And now, they were telling me there was no room for me. No space in their homes, in their hearts, in their lives. That night, I sat alone on a bench outside the shelter. It was cold. My back ached. My hands, stiff with arthritis, shook as I held the only picture I had left, one of the 3 of them when they were children, smiling, innocent, still mine. I didn't cry. I had no more tears to give, just silence. And a pain I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. People think homelessness happens to those who don't try hard enough, to those who make bad choices, but I am here to tell you it also happens to mothers. 2 grandmothers. 2 women who gave everything and were left behind when they had nothing left to give. I never thought I'd end up here. I thought I was doing everything right. I thought love would be enough. But I was wrong. When you're a mother, especially an aging one, there's a moment when you start to realize that the roles are reversing. The children you once bathed, fed, and tucked into bed now offer to take your hand across the street, read the fine print on your bills, or attend doctor appointments with you. It's subtle at first, and you welcome it. After all, it feels like love. It feels like care. But real love doesn't come with conditions. It doesn't come with signatures, transfers, or whispers behind closed doors. I remember the day I first let go of control. I had just turned 78, and I was beginning to forget things, appointments, what day of the week it was, even whether I had taken my medication. My daughter Anna noticed. She was the most assertive of the 3, always managing something. She told me, "Mom, we should really simplify things for you. You don't need to worry about paperwork and legal stuff anymore." She offered to help pay the bills just temporarily. She said, "We'll make it easier for you," she told me. placing her hand gently on mine. I was so grateful. I even remember feeling proud of her. I thought, look at the daughter I raised strong, responsible, taking care of me. David followed not long after. He asked me to come to the bank with him. It's just a precaution, he explained. We'll put my name on your accounts so we can access money if anything happens to you. He framed it as security, as protection. It felt like what family does. I didn't question it. Why would I? These were my children, my flesh and blood. I had changed their diapers, wiped their tears, stayed up nights when they had fevers. If I couldn't trust them, who could I trust? Then came the house. Matthew, my youngest, brought up the idea over coffee one day. Mom, it's best if the house is in one of our names. If something happens to you, probate courts take forever. We're just trying to help. That phrase, just trying to help, was repeated so often it became a lullaby I didn't realize was lulling me into surrender. I signed papers. I didn't read all the details. I trusted them. When you're old and tired, and the people you love assure you they're taking care of things, it's so easy to say, okay. I signed over the deed. I handed over my account access. I gave them the keys, both figuratively and literally. There was no ceremony to the betrayal. No sudden collapse. It was slow, silent, calculated. I started noticing little things. I'd ask Anna for help with something, and she'd brush me off. We're busy, Mom. David began answering less of my calls. Matthew stopped coming around altogether. I went from being a mother to being a burden. But the final blow came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I had gone to the pharmacy to pick up my prescriptions. When I handed over my Medicare card and debit card, the clerk looked at me with a strange sympathy. This card's been declined, she said. I tried another. Same thing. Confused, I walked to the bank only to be told that I was no longer authorized on my own account. You'll need to contact the primary account holder, the banker told me, kindly but firmly. That name was David. My stomach sank. I felt my knees wobble. Everything inside me collapsed with a kind of silent scream I'll never forget. I walked home in the rain. When I arrived, I noticed the locks had been changed. My key didn't work. I banged on the door until my hands hurt. No one answered. I sat on the front steps until night fell, soaked to the bone, trembling, humiliated. Later, a neighbor walked by and said softly, I thought you moved in with your daughter. Moved. I hadn't moved. I had been removed. Everything. I had built every corner of that home. Every dollar in my savings, every piece of paperwork was now in their control, and they had locked me out. I was no longer a mother. I was an inconvenience. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in a bus shelter, watching headlights pass by, thinking about every night I had stayed awake with one of them in my arms. I remembered the time Anna had pneumonia, and I rocked her all night. The time David broke his arm, and I sat in the hospital holding his hand. The time Matthew got bullied, and I wrote a letter to the school, demanding justice. I had trusted them with my future because I thought love was enough. I thought the years of sacrifice had earned me a place of safety. But I was wrong. They say your home is your sanctuary, the one place where the world can't hurt you. Where your memories live in the walls, where every photo, every dish, every dent in the furniture tells your story. For me, that house wasn't just bricks and mortar, it was a monument to my life's work. I poured everything into it. I raised my children there. I laughed, cried, and aged inside those four walls. It was where I hoped I'd spend the rest of my days. Watching the seasons change from the porch swing, but one day, without warning, it stopped being mine. I still remember the morning vividly. It was a Tuesday in early spring. The daffodils in the front garden were starting to bloom, planted years ago by my late mother. I had just returned from the market with a small bag of groceries. I had taken a bus because, well, they had sold my car months earlier for maintenance costs. I was trying to be understanding. After all, they were helping me. That's what I told myself when I reached the front door and put the key in the lock. It wouldn't turn. At first, I thought I was just tired or had picked up the wrong key. I tried again, then again. It didn't budge. My hands started to tremble. I pressed the doorbell. Nothing. I knocked once, twice, a dozen times. Still nothing. Finally, a neighbor I hadn't spoken to in months peeked out from behind her blinds. She came to the porch cautiously. I thought you'd already moved out, she said. I blinked at her, confused. Moved out. She looked uncomfortable. Well, I saw a moving truck here last weekend. I just assumed your kids had taken you to live with them. That's when it hit me. Like ice water down my spine. I hadn't moved. I'd been moved out. I sat down on the steps, groceries at my feet, my hands trembling uncontrollably. I pulled out my phone and called David. No answer. Then Anna. Straight to voicemail. Matthew. Disconnected. I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. Everything in me screamed that something was terribly wrong, but I still wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding. That they would show up, smiling, explaining it all away. But hours passed. No one came. Later that evening, a man in a suit showed up. He had a clipboard in his hand and a coldness in his eyes. "Ma'am, you need to leave the premises," he said flatly. "This is my house," I replied, my voice trembling. He looked down at the papers. "It's been legally transferred. You're no longer the owner." I felt like the earth opened beneath me. I wanted to scream, to collapse, to vanish. Who owns it now? The title is now under David and Anna Morrison. Are those your children? My world collapsed in that moment. Everything blurred: the sidewalk, the man's face, the daffodils. I could barely breathe. I had given them my trust. I had signed papers I didn't understand because I believed in them. Believed love would protect me. But that belief had cost me everything. I tried to explain. There must be a mistake. This house was supposed to be mine until I died. The man didn't even flinch. "I'm just doing my job, ma'am." With trembling legs, I stood up, picked up my groceries, and walked away from the only home I had ever known. I didn't even know where I was going. I just walked. Past the flower shop I used to take Linda to, past the church where I volunteered for 20 years, past the school where I cheered my kids on from the bleachers. All of it now felt like memories stolen from me, just like my house. That night, I slept on a bench outside the bus terminal. My back ached. My hands were stiff with cold. I used my coat as a blanket and my grocery bag as a pillow. But the worst pain wasn't physical. It was knowing that my children, my babies, had done this to me. It was the unbearable truth that they had looked me in the eye, taken my signature, my savings, my home, and walked away without remorse. People pass by, the homeless every day, and they think they know the story. Drugs, bad choices, laziness. But my story is none of those things. I was a mother. A good one. I gave until there was nothing left to give. I never thought it would cost me my dignity. That house still stands. I walked by it once more in the weeks that followed. The paint had been changed. The curtains were different. A new mailbox. There was no trace of me, and that's when I realized the day the house stopped being mine wasn't the day I lost the key. It was the day I trusted that love would be enough to protect me from betrayal. After losing my house, I thought the worst was over, but I was wrong. What came next was almost more painful than the betrayal itself. It was the silence. The disbelief. The cold indifference from the very people I thought would care. I spent the first few days after being evicted trying to make sense of it all. I wandered the streets in a daze, clutching the same small grocery bag I had carried that Tuesday. It was nearly empty now, but it gave me some strange sense of comfort, something to hold on to when I had nothing else. I couldn't bring myself to cry yet. My shock was too deep. The tears would come later, but first came the shame. I went to the church I had attended for nearly 30 years. Pastor Glenn was someone I considered a friend. I had taught Sunday school. I'd baked pies for every potluck. I'd organized prayer circles and stitched banners for the sanctuary. I walked in quietly, just before the Wednesday evening service started, hoping I could sit down with him, explain everything, and maybe, just maybe, he could help. When I approached him, he gave me a look I'll never forget. Not warm, not kind. It was like I was a stranger. "Margaret," he said cautiously, "we heard you moved in with your children." I shook my head. "No, they tricked me. They took my house. I'm sleeping outside." His eyes darted away uncomfortably. "That's quite an accusation. Are you sure you're not confused? Sometimes paperwork can." "I'm not confused," I interrupted, my voice cracking. "They stole everything. I need help." He paused, then said the words that stung like a slap. "I'm sorry, Margaret, but this isn't something we can get involved in. It's a family matter." A family matter. That's what everyone kept calling it, as if betrayal from your own blood makes it less cruel, less damaging, more acceptable somehow. I left the church with my heart breaking all over again. The people I had prayed with, laughed with, mourned with, they looked at me with suspicion. like I had lost my mind. Some whispered that maybe I had dementia. Others assumed I had given everything to my kids willingly and was now regretting it. No one asked me how I was eating, where I was sleeping, if I needed a warm coat. I reached out to my old friend Norma. We'd been neighbors for 20 years. Before she moved into a retirement community, I called her from a public library phone. "Margaret," she said, surprised, "is everything okay?" "No," I said, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Norma, my children took my house. I'm living on the street." She hesitated. "Oh, honey, are you sure? David always seemed like such a nice boy." I didn't know how to answer. Was I sure? Of course I was. I had the bruises on my heart to prove it. But what do you say when even your oldest friend doubts your truth? The worst was when I went to the police. I didn't know what else to do. I brought the last papers I had signed, not that I fully understood them, and I explained everything to the officer on duty. He listened politely but offered no solutions. "Ma'am," he said, "if you signed the deed, transfer, and power of attorney documents, it's legal. We can't intervene in civil matters like this unless there's evidence of fraud." I stared at him, but I was tricked. I didn't understand what I was signing. He sighed. "Did you consult a lawyer?" "No," I whispered. "I trusted my children." He handed me a pamphlet about elderly services and gently told me to try a shelter. A shelter. After decades of working, raising a family, paying taxes, and building a life, I was offered a pamphlet and a blanket. I walked outside into the cold evening air, sat down on the edge of a fountain, and let the tears finally come. The kind that come from a place deeper than your chest. The kind that burn your face as they fall. I wasn't just mourning the loss of my home, I was mourning the death of trust. No one believed me. Not the church, not the law, not even my friends. But I knew the truth, I had lived it. And that night, as I huddled beneath a thin coat in a city park, I made myself a quiet promise. I would keep telling my story, even if no one listened, even if they turned their backs, because maybe, just maybe, someone else out there would hear it and know they weren't alone. It's strange how quickly people can turn on you when you have nothing. Once upon a time, I was respected in my community. A kind grandmother, an active church member, someone people could count on. But the day I lost my home and was forced onto the streets, the world stopped seeing me as a person. I became invisible to some and worse than invisible to others. I remember one morning vividly. I hadn't slept at all the night before. The public park where I usually tried to rest had become overrun by teenagers drinking and playing loud music. So, I wandered through the night until I found an empty bench near the back of the bus station. It wasn't comfortable, but at least it was quiet. I woke up to a police officer tapping the end of his baton on the bench near my feet. "You can't sleep here, ma'am," he said, already sounding irritated. I tried to sit up slowly, my joints aching from the cold metal beneath me. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean any trouble. I'll leave." He looked me up and down like I was some kind of criminal. "Do you have ID?" I fumbled through my bag and handed him my old driver's license. He scanned it, asked a few questions, and finally let me go with a warning. "Next time, I'll have to write you up. Write me up. For sitting on a bench." I tried not to cry in front of him. I wanted to scream. "I'm not a threat. I'm not a vagrant. I'm a mother, a grandmother. I used to own a home not far from here. But none of that mattered anymore. Without an address, a roof, or money, I was just another burden. A nuisance." That wasn't the only time I was treated like a criminal. A few weeks later, I was in a small grocery store downtown. It was warm inside, and I was hoping to just stand in the back for a few minutes and thaw out. I didn't plan to take anything, I swear on my mother's name, but I must have looked too desperate, too lost, because one of the workers started following me down every aisle. I pretended to look at the shelves, just trying to keep my dignity. But then he called the manager over, and within minutes, I was being accused of loitering. They asked me to leave. They didn't even ask if I needed help, just told me to get out. I walked out of that store with tears stinging my eyes, not from shame, but from humiliation. I felt like less than nothing. Like I had no right to exist in the places I once shopped, walked, and greeted friends. The worst part, I began to believe them. I began to think maybe I didn't belong anywhere anymore. That may be the version of me that had Sunday dinners with her kids, sewed quilts for her grandbabies, and drank tea on her front porch. That woman was gone. That maybe I was some kind of burden now. Something people wished would just disappear. And that kind of thinking is dangerous. Because once you start believing you're less than human, you stop fighting for yourself. I went to days without eating, at one point, not because there was no food around, but because I didn't have the strength to ask. I was too embarrassed to walk into a shelter or line up for a free meal. I was tired of the looks. Tired of being scanned and judged. Tired of being treated like I had done something wrong just for existing. Then one afternoon, something small changed me. I was sitting behind a library building, hiding from the wind, when a young woman walked up and handed me a paper bag with a sandwich inside. She didn't ask questions. She didn't stare. She just smiled gently and said, "You matter." Don't forget that. Those 3 words cut deeper than any insult. You matter. I clutched that sandwich like it was gold. And, as I ate it, tears ran down my face, not from hunger, but from the sheer shock that someone saw me, truly saw me. That was the moment I decided. I couldn't let this world steal my dignity. I couldn't let their assumptions define me. I had been through hell, yes. I had been cast out by my own flesh and blood, yes. But I was still Margaret, still someone who had loved deeply, still someone who had stories and memories and value. I may have been treated like a criminal, but I was not a criminal. I was a victim of betrayal, of injustice, of a system that failed to protect the elderly from manipulation and abandonment. And if I had to keep telling my story to reclaim my voice, then that's exactly what I would do. Because if even one other person out there is going through what I did, they need to know they're not alone. I used to believe that memories were a luxury. Something you looked back on fondly when life slowed down and the world got quiet. But when you're left with nothing, when everything and everyone you've ever known abandons you, memories become your only refuge. They become the home you no longer have. At night, curled up on a piece of cardboard behind the church downtown, I would close my eyes and pretend I was somewhere else. Somewhere warm. I'd imagine the scent of lavender coming through the window of my old home, the one I raised my children in. I could almost hear the laughter of little feet running through the halls, chasing one another with wooden toy swords my late husband carved himself. Those memories, they saved me, because the reality was too dark to sit in for too long. One night, in particular, stands out. It was raining hard, and the overhang I had found for shelter started to leak. My coat was soaked through. I was shivering so hard I could hardly breathe. I remember wrapping my arms around myself and whispering into the air, "Do you remember, Michael? Do you remember how we used to dance in the kitchen while the stew simmered on Sundays?" Michael, my husband. He passed away a decade ago. If he had been alive, none of this would have happened. He never would have let the kids manipulate me, lie to me, and steal my home right out from under me. He was my protector, my compass, but all I had left of him were flashes of memories, his laugh, his scratchy beard, the way he hummed gospel songs while fixing the porch swing. The cruel irony of losing everything material is that you cling even harder to the intangible. I began to collect memories like treasures. Every smile, every song, every bedtime story I had ever told my children. I would sit in silence and replay those moments, as if trying to prove to myself that they had really happened, that I had once mattered, that I had once been loved. Sometimes, I wondered if my children ever remembered them too. Did Sarah think about the time I stayed up all night making her Halloween costume? The one with the handmade wings and glitter that she bragged about for weeks? Did Jacob recall how I took a second job just to pay for his college prep classes? How I used to sneak snacks into his backpack before exams? Did they even remember who I used to be? Or had their greed and entitlement buried all of that? There's something devastating about being forgotten by the people you gave your entire life to. I didn't just raise my kids, I built my world around them. Every decision, every sacrifice, every prayer was for them, and now, they lived in my house, wore my jewelry, used my dishes, probably sat on the couch, and watched movies in the living room I once decorated with such love. I imagine Sarah throwing parties there, laughing with her friends about how crazy her old mom had become. How confused I had been when she and her brother convinced me to sign those papers. They had taken my life, and yet, they couldn't take my memories. One morning, I found myself standing outside a school playground, clutching the fence and watching the kids play. A little girl in pigtails tripped and started crying. Her grandmother rushed over, kissed her scraped knee, and held her tight. I broke down. I stood there, sobbing like a child, remembering all the times I had done that exact thing for my grandchildren. I hadn't seen them in years. Sarah told them I was sick and needed space. But I knew she was lying. I knew she didn't want them to know the truth that their grandmother had been cast aside like garbage. But I made a vow to myself. In that moment, I would not let my memories rot in silence. I would speak them aloud, tell my story, even if only to the birds, the wind, or kind strangers on the street. I may not have a home. I may not have a bed, or a stove, or a front porch to rock on, but I have my truth. And sometimes, that's all a woman has. People always say blood is thicker than water, like it's some unbreakable bond that can't be shattered. But I've come to learn that betrayal by blood cuts deeper than any wound. When strangers hurt you, it's painful. But when it's your own children, the ones you carried, nursed, protected, it's a devastation that seeps into your bones. I had heard stories from other elderly women in the shelter, tales of abandonment, neglect, and deceit from their families. I used to think, that would never happen to me. My children love me. They would never let me fall. But love doesn't always look like love. Sometimes, it hides behind manipulation, masked by smiles and hollow reassurances. Jacob was the first to change. After Michael died, he became distant. He rarely called, and when he did, it was always about money, his business ventures, his loans, his big dreams that always needed funding. I was proud of him, so I gave what I could. I dipped into my savings, then my retirement. He promised to pay me back, to take care of me one day. I believed him. I was his mother, after all. Then came Sarah, with her smooth talk and sweet tone. She was the orchestrator, I realize now. She'd visit more often, bringing meals and helping with the bills. I thought it was love. But it was preparation. She started offering to manage my mail, my medications, even my bank account to make things easier. One day, she brought over some papers. Just something to protect your assets, Mom, she said, so we can make sure you're safe. I didn't read them. I trusted her. I signed. Weeks later, I was informed by a notary I'd never met that the house was no longer in my name. My own daughter had convinced me to sign away my home, the place where I raised her, where her baby pictures still hung on the walls. I confronted her. She didn't deny it. You're getting older, Mom, she said coldly. It's better this way. You'll be taken care of. But I wasn't. Within days, I was asked no, told to move out. No explanation, no remorse. They took everything, the house, the car, my jewelry, even the furniture. Things I had worked decades to build. They left me with a suitcase and a confused heart. I went to the church for help, then the shelter. Each time I explained my situation, I saw the same look on people's faces, half pity, half disbelief. Your children did this. Yes, my children. My flesh and blood, the ones I sacrificed everything for. At night, I would sit in that shelter, surrounded by strangers, and try to understand how this happened. How did the people I loved most become the ones who hurt me the deepest? I thought about Jacob as a boy, the way he used to grip my hand when he was scared. The time he broke his arm and cried into my chest, begging me not to leave him at the hospital. I thought about Sarah's wedding day, how I stayed up all night sewing beads onto her veil. Because she wanted something personal. I gave her everything I had. And now, they couldn't even give me a bed. It wasn't just about the material things, it was about the trust, the bond, the years of love and labor that were now treated as debts to be collected. Some nights I'd whisper to God, what did I do wrong? Was I too soft? To giving. But deep down, I knew this wasn't about me failing as a mother. It was about them choosing greed over gratitude. Entitlement over empathy. One day, I saw Sarah at a supermarket. She looked right through me. Walked past like I was invisible. My own daughter. I stood there, heart pounding, eyes stinging, as she laughed with her friends, holding a basket full of organic produce and name-brand goods. I hadn't eaten a full meal in 2 days. That moment broke me more than any eviction or insult. Because it confirmed what I feared most. I wasn't just abandoned. I was erased. But even in that pain, something inside me shifted. I realized that if I was strong enough to carry them into this world, then I was strong enough to carry myself through this storm. They may have betrayed me, but I would not betray myself. I began writing my story in a journal someone gave me at the shelter. Page by page, I reclaimed my truth. Not for them, but for me, because even if my own children turned their backs on me, I would not be silent. I may have lost my home, my belongings, and my family, but I still had my voice. And I was going to use it. After losing everything, my home, my family, found myself standing on a cracked sidewalk, holding a tattered duffel bag with everything I had left in the world. The house I had lived in for over 40 years now belonged to someone else. My daughter, and I was nothing more than a forgotten name on a title deed I didn't even read. My name meant nothing to them anymore. I remember that first night vividly. The air was cold, biting. It wrapped around me like punishment. I had nowhere to go, no one to call, no plan. I wandered for hours, not wanting to accept that this cold sidewalk, this night sky without a roof was now my new world. Eventually, I sat on a bench outside a closed store. That became my first bed. The thing no one tells you about being homeless is how quickly you disappear. People stop seeing you. You become part of the background, like a street lamp or a garbage bin. Even when you cry, no one turns their head. It's like grief has made you invisible. I remember watching mothers, with their kids pass by. I used to be one of them once, pushing a stroller, hurrying to pick up groceries or get home in time to cook dinner. And now I was on the other side of the glass, broken, discarded. I tried to find help. I went to a shelter downtown. The line was long, and the air inside smelled like old sweat and despair. But at least it was warm. They gave me soup and a cot, and for the first time in days, I didn't cry myself to sleep because I was too exhausted to even try. There, I met other women like me, grandmothers, widows, survivors. Each had a different story, but the same ending, abandoned by the people they loved the most. One woman, Doris, told me her son moved to another state and never came back. Another, Ethel, had a daughter who changed the locks while she was at a doctor's appointment. We weren't drug addicts. We weren't crazy. We were mothers, wives, caregivers discarded because we were no longer useful. In the shelter, I started writing again. Every night, after dinner, I would sit near the hallway light with a borrowed notebook and pen. I wrote everything: memories of Michael, the first time I held Jacob, how Sarah used to twirl in the hallway in her Sunday dress. Writing reminded me I had lived a life once. A real life, a full one. Some days, I would walk past my old neighborhood. I don't know why I tortured myself that way. Maybe I hoped someone would see me and say, "Come back." But they never did. The curtains were always drawn. The porch light no longer turned on for me. One morning, I walked by and saw my old swing set in the front yard painted over, but still there. I built that swing set for my grandchildren with my bare hands. I stood there, numb, and whispered, "That used to be mine." But memories can't keep you warm at night. Being on the streets stripped me of every layer I once had. I didn't care about makeup or clean clothes. I learned to carry myself differently, to look down, to hold my bag close, to keep moving. Vulnerability could be dangerous when you had nothing left to lose. But even in that darkness, there were moments of unexpected kindness. A young man once gave me a coffee and didn't ask questions. A teenager offered me her scarf on a snowy night. And one morning, a woman sat beside me and simply said, "You look like someone who needs to be seen." And I cried, not because I was sad, but because I had forgotten what it felt like to be acknowledged. I learned how to survive. I learned where to go for warm food, which shelters were safer, which alleys were quietest at night. I became resourceful. And as strange as it sounds, I found a sliver of strength inside that despair. But the pain of what my children did never left me. Every time someone walked by with their family, I wondered, do they know how lucky they are? Do they hug their mothers tightly? Or are they like mine, cold, distant, entitled? The streets became my reality. Not because I chose them, but because the people I loved chose to abandon me. They built their lives on the ashes of mine. And yet, here I was, still standing. Still breathing, still writing. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if I'll ever get back what I lost, but I do know this: I will not be silenced by shame. I am not the one who failed. I am the one who was failed. I never thought I would say goodbye to my children while still breathing. I carried them in my body. I held them when they had fevers. I made their Halloween costumes, stayed up late helping with school projects, wiped their tears, and clapped for their smallest victories. And in return, when I needed them the most, when my body had grown frail and my heart tender, they threw me out like a worn-out coat. It took time to accept it, but that goodbye wasn't just physical. It was the moment I stopped hoping they'd come back. It was the moment I let go of the illusion that my love alone could bring them back to me. I remember the exact day. I had returned to the shelter after spending a rainy afternoon in the park. My coat soaked and my shoes squeaking with each step. I saw a young couple, nearby parents, no older than my own kids, arguing about what kind of juice their child liked. It was such a trivial thing. And yet, it broke me, because I would have given anything to have that kind of moment with my children again. To fight about juice, to disagree on dinner, to simply exist in their world, but I was no longer in it. I wasn't invited. I wasn't welcome. That night, I sat on the edge of my cot and wrote a letter. A letter not meant to be sent. A letter to say goodbye. To my children, I don't know who you've become, but I know who I was when I raised you. I gave you everything. I had time, love, sacrifice. I believed in you. I protected you. And now, as I sit alone in a place you'll never visit, wearing clothes you'll never wash, eating food you'll never cook, I release the need to understand why. I release the need to understand why. I release the ache of waiting for an apology. I release the guilt you placed on me. I release the mother I was to you, because she died the day you turned your back on me. Mom, I folded the letter and placed it in my Bible. Not to be mailed, just to be buried, like the part of me that still hoped for a reunion. Some may say I'm bitter. Maybe I am, but bitterness is the residue of betrayal? And I'd rather be bitter than broken. After that night, I stopped walking by my old house. I stopped asking mutual friends about how they were doing. I unfollowed them in my mind, unfriended them in my heart. It was the only way to move forward. Clinging to hope was drowning me. I didn't need hope anymore, I needed healing. One day, I walked into a small community center. A woman named Yolanda greeted me with warm eyes and a gentle voice. She handed me a cup of tea and asked, "What's your story?" And for the first time in a long while, I told it. Not as a victim, not as a broken mother, but as a survivor, a woman who had lost everything and was still standing. She didn't judge me. She didn't offer cheap sympathy. She simply listened. And sometimes, that's all we need. Weeks later, Yolanda introduced me to a writing group, other seniors who had stories of pain, loss, betrayal. I sat in a circle of weathered faces, each with eyes that had seen too much. And I felt understood. I told them about the final goodbye, about how freeing it was, about how sometimes, in order to heal, we must mourn people who are still alive. We laughed, we cried. And in that room, I felt like I had children, again not by blood, but by bond. People who saw me, people who didn't need my money, my house, or my legacy. Just me. Letting go of my children was not easy. It still hurts, especially during holidays or birthdays. I still find myself looking at old photos, wondering where it all went wrong. But I no longer let that grief define me. They took everything, but they didn't take my voice. They didn't take my strength, and they'll never take my truth. My final goodbye wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was a quiet acceptance. A decision to no longer chase people who don't want to be caught. If you've ever had to walk away from someone you once would have died for, I want you to know, it's okay. It doesn't make you weak. It makes you brave. Asterisk. There comes a moment in life when you realize no one is coming to save you. That moment hit me hard one evening, as I curled up beneath a highway overpass, using my thin coat as a blanket. The cold from the concrete seeped through my bones, and I remember thinking, this is it, Margaret. No one is coming. Not your children, not your friends, not even a miracle. But something else came instead. Strength. Not the kind of strength people admire on the outside, the muscles or bravado. No, this was a quiet, fierce kind of strength. The kind you build one breath at a time, one tear at a time. The kind that comes from being pushed so low. You either rise or disappear. And I chose to rise. I started with the smallest things. I found a library nearby and began spending my days there. It was warm, quiet, and no one judged me. I'd read everything: magazines, cookbooks, even children's novels. It wasn't about the content, it was about reminding myself that I still had a mind, a heart, a soul. I'd look at the mothers reading to their kids, and instead of sinking into sorrow, I tried to smile. They didn't know my story, and I didn't want them to. I just wanted to feel human again. Then came the next step. A part-time cleaning job at a church downtown. Yes, a church. I hadn't stepped inside one in years. Not since the day I begged my pastor for help and left in tears when he told me to pray harder. But this time was different. This time, I was just a name on a schedule. No judgment, no questions. I scrubbed pews, cleaned bathrooms, and polished floors until my knees ached. And for the first time in a long time, I felt useful. Do you know what that feels like when the world has treated you like trash? To feel useful again. It was healing. I saved every penny. I skipped meals. I collected bottles and cans for spare change. Eventually, I had enough to rent a tiny room in a shared house, nothing fancy. But it had a door I could lock, a bed I could call mine, and a window that faced the sunrise. That first night in my new room, I sat on the mattress and cried. Not because I was sad, but because I had survived. Against all odds. Against every betrayal. Against every voice that said, "You'll never make it." They were wrong. I made it. Every morning, I'd wake up early and look at myself in the mirror, my hair grayer than ever, my hands worn, my face marked by time and tears, but I would whisper to myself, "You are still here. You are still worthy." And slowly, I believed it. I started attending group meetings at the local shelter with, like me, forgotten by the people they once raised or loved. We shared stories, we laughed, we cried. One woman gave me a scarf she knitted. Another brought me tea when I was sick. We became each other's family. Not by blood, but by bond. I also started journaling, pages and pages of pain, of memories, of dreams I had once abandoned. I called it my second life diary. Because that's what it felt like. I was no longer Margaret the mother who was betrayed. I was Margaret the warrior who rose. One day, a volunteer named Angela read a few pages of my diary. She looked at me and said, "You need to share this. Your story can help others." At first, I laughed. Who would want to hear from a homeless grandmother with a broken past? But she persisted, and with her help, we turned my story into a small blog, The Strength of a Forgotten Woman. We posted weekly. My words reached hundreds, then thousands. I received messages from women all over the world, some abandoned by their children, some abused, some just lost. They thanked me. Can you imagine? After being thrown away, I was now giving hope to others. That was when I realized, survival wasn't just something I did, it had become who I was. I was no longer the woman crying alone in the hospital. I was no longer the mother begging for a return phone call. I was someone who had built herself back up from nothing, using nothing but truth, grit, and the grace of strangers. The pain didn't vanish, but it became part of the story. A scar, not a wound. I still walk past families sometimes and wonder if my children ever look for me. I doubt it, but that's okay. I no longer need their approval or their presence to define my value, because survival gave me something they never could, self-respect, and no one can take that from me again. I used to think rock bottom was a place where hope died. A final stop, but now I know it's where rebirth begins. After years of pain, betrayal, and living on the edge of survival, something shifted in me. Not all at once, but slowly, like the sun rising after a long, dark night. I had found shelter. I had found purpose. But something still felt missing. For so long, I had only been mom, grandma, homeless, or Margaret, the one her kids abandoned. I needed to find me again. The woman behind the scars. So I began asking myself a powerful question: what now? What do I do with all the hurt, all the lessons, all the strength I had no choice but to develop? I decided to rebuild. Not just survive, thrive. I enrolled in a free art class at the community center. I'd never held a paintbrush in my life, but I figured, why not? The first time I dipped a brush in color and let it glide across the canvas, I felt a spark. I wasn't just recreating images. I was releasing my story. Every stroke was a memory. Every color a feeling I hadn't been able to say out loud. My first painting was of a woman in the rain, looking up toward the sky. I titled it, "She Still Believes." When I showed it to my art teacher, she cried. She asked if she could hang it in the center's hallway. That small moment gave me something priceless, validation. For the first time in decades. Someone saw beauty in what I created, not just pity in my circumstances. I started painting regularly, selling small pieces at flea markets, even giving a few to women I met at the shelter. One day, a woman came up to me, holding one of my prints, and said, "This saved me from ending my life." I hugged her, and we both cried. That was when I realized, what I had rebuilt wasn't just a life, it was a legacy. Meanwhile, I began to rebuild my body too. I changed my diet, walked daily, and attended wellness workshops. Not because I was trying to chase youth, but because I deserved to feel good in my skin again. I also began volunteering, first at the same shelter that once gave me a warm bed, and later with an organization that helps elderly women reclaim their lives after abandonment. I stood in front of rooms full of strangers and told my story. The first time I did it, my knees shook, and my voice cracked, but they listened. And after, a line of women waited to hug me, to share their stories, and to thank me. That's when it clicked. Maybe my children didn't want my love, but others still did. I wasn't invisible anymore. I reached out to my old church and asked to start a Forgotten Mothers support group. To my surprise, they welcomed me back. Not everyone who once judged me was still there. The new pastor had a kind heart. He said, "The church failed you once. Let's not do that again." Our group began with 3 women, then 5, then 12. We shared stories, laughed, cried, and healed together. These women became my family not through blood, but through brokenness and bravery. One night, after group, I sat on my little bed, surrounded by letters and drawings from women I had helped. I held one in particular. It was from a young girl who had run away from an abusive home and found courage in my story. Her words, "I didn't think I could survive. But then I read what you went through, and I knew I could." That letter is framed on my wall now. It reminded me that even the most shattered life can be pieced back together into something powerful. I even found the courage to contact one of my granddaughters. I hadn't spoken to her in years. She was hesitant at first, I understood, but slowly, we exchanged letters, then phone calls. One day, she asked if she could visit. When she showed up at my door, I barely recognized her, tall, poised, full of life. She hugged me tight and whispered, "I always wondered what happened to you." We spent hours talking. I didn't badmouth her parents. I didn't retell every awful thing. I just told her who I was, what I'd been through, and what I'd become. She cried. I cried. But most of all, we connected. And for the first time in years, I felt like a mother again. Rebuilding from rock bottom wasn't about getting everything back. It was about becoming something better than before. I may never have a mansion or all my children back. But I have dignity. I have peace. And I have a voice that I will never let be silenced again. So, to anyone out there sitting at their own rock bottom, I say this: your story isn't over. Your pain is not your identity. You are more than what was done to you. You are becoming. Asterisk, if you had told me, 10 years ago, that I would be sitting in a warm room, sipping tea, writing my story for the world to hear, I would have laughed. Or maybe cried, or both, because 10 years ago, I didn't think I had a story worth telling. I thought my pain was just that pain. Now I know its power. My name is Elaine Carter, and I'm 78 years old. I've walked through storms, through silence, through betrayal by the very children I once held in my arms. They took everything from my home, my security, my trust. They left me on the edge of society, abandoned in my old age like yesterday's trash. But they didn't take my voice. That I found again. After rebuilding piece by piece, through shelters, through strangers who became angels, through support groups and silent prayers, I realized that telling my story was more than healing, it was justice. Not the kind that comes from courtrooms or signatures on paper, but the kind that rises from within. The kind that says, "You didn't break me, you refined me." I began speaking at women's centers. I was invited to community radio, then podcasts. People were listening, and with every retelling of my journey, I saw the spark in someone else's eyes, the spark that says, "If she can survive this, maybe I can too." That's when I knew my voice was no longer just mine. It belonged to every woman who'd been silenced, to every mother discarded, to every grandmother forgotten. And the more I spoke, the more I heard. Letters began pouring in. Handwritten, notes, emails, messages on social media. One read, "Elaine, your story saved my life. I was sitting on my bathroom floor ready to give up when I heard your voice on the radio. Thank you for surviving. I still cry when I read it. You see, I used to believe I had nothing left to offer the world. No money, no home, no family ties. But I have something more enduring, a story that matters. And now, I help other women write theirs. At the local shelter, I host legacy journals. We sit around a table, tea in hand, and each woman begins to write some for the first time in decades. I watch them smile through tears as they remember who they were before life tried to erase them. I tell them what I'm about to tell you. You are not invisible. You are not disposable. And you are not alone. I may have lost everything I once knew, but what I gained was priceless. A new family made of survivors. A purpose stronger than any house or car. A name that now means something beyond bloodlines. Elaine, the woman who rose. Sometimes, I walk by the park where I used to sleep. I see other elderly women on benches, their eyes full of pain. I stop, sit beside them, and listen. Because I know the power of being heard, and sometimes, when I sit alone with a warm blanket and my cup of tea. I smile not because life is perfect but because I finally feel whole. I don't know what happened to all of my children. Some disappeared, some built lives on lies. But I pray for them, not because they deserve it, but because I deserve peace. I found that peace in storytelling, in honesty, in hope, and now, I use this voice, this victory, not for revenge, but for redemption, because every time a woman stands up and says, "This happened to me," another chain breaks. And I want you, dear listener, dear reader, dear soul, who stumbled upon this message, to hear this loud and clear. Asterisk, if you've been silenced. Speak, if you've been abandoned. Rise, if you've been broken. Rebuild. And if no one believes in you, believe in yourself first. Your story matters. Your tears matter. You matter. Don't let what they did define who you are. Let what you become be your loudest reply. I am Elaine Carter. And I turned my sorrow into strength. My silence into a voice. My losses into legacy. Now it's your turn. Asterisk, if my story touched your heart, please don't let it end here. Like this video to help more people find it. Leave a comment, share your story, your strength, your pain. I read them all. Subscribe for more stories of survival, healing, and truth. Share this video with someone who needs to hear. You are not forgotten. You're not just watching a video, you're joining a movement. A movement of voices that will no longer be silent.